No, I don't agree at all. I mean, we have been through a big process of change and modernisation of the Labour Party. That is absolutely true. But it's been a process of change that I think has been well worth undertaking. And as you probably know, throughout my time in the Labour Party, I've wanted to move the Labour Party on from positions it's held in the past in order to get the proper modernised Labour Party that we have today. New Labour is very much what I believe in. It's very much my own creation.
But did you believe in old Labour?
I believed in the values of the Labour Party, yes.
No, did you believe in what this...
There were a whole series of policy positions that I adopted along with the rest of the Labour Party, but the very process of modernisation has been the very process that I have undertaken in the Labour Party.
I know that,
For example,
have you abandoned, yes. Did you believe what you said you believed in the 80s?
Look, of course, we always believed in the idea of a more just and more fair society, and the Labour Party believed for a long period of time that the way to do that was, for example, greater nationalisation, was, for example, simply more increased state spending. The whole process of modernisation, David, has been to take the Labour Party away from that, to keep true to its principles, but put those principles properly in a modern setting.
So all that was wrong?
No, I don't say all that was wrong.
Most of it was wrong.
I simply say what is important is to apply those principles to the modern world. Look, for example, I mean, John Major stood in the 1970s on a platform of Scottish devolution. Margaret Thatcher was the person that closed more grammar schools than anyone else. She was a member of Ted Heath's government. You know, times move on. I mean,
but it pales into insignificant...
My whole time within the Labour Party, I mean, let us just be realistic about this. From the moment that I came into the Labour Party, I've argued that it had to change and modernise and update itself. I was the person who, when I was the Treasury spokesman for the Labour Party, was arguing that we had to stand up for the rights of small investors. I was the person, when I got into the shadow cabinet, that withdrew our support for the closed shop. I was the shadow Home Secretary that was the person that said Labour had to toughen its stance on law and order, that we had to stand up for the rights of the citizen against the criminal. I was the person that argued the case.
And you were
the changes in the union relationships when people thought that the best way to look at collective bargaining arrangements between employer and employee was not to have a legal framework. We changed that. And let me say something to you. I'm proud of the changes that the Labour Party has made.
No, but hang on.
Look, at that time, people thought, for perfectly understandable reasons, that the best way to have an industrial relations framework was to get the law out of it. That changed. Indeed, I was one of those people that changed that position of the Labour Party.
The Conservative Party were in the van on this. They decided that it was right to have a framework.
If I can just finish this. The Labour Party itself had the chance to do this back in the 1960s within place of strife. That attempt failed. As I've said myself often, it would have been better if that attempt had succeeded. But I'm afraid that this sort of Conservative propaganda, that I was some sort of extreme left-winger that suddenly trimmed after I became Labour leader, I was the person who was at the forefront of all the moves to modernise the Labour Party. And yes, we've changed. And I make no apology for saying that we've changed, because we had to get the Labour Party up to date to apply those values of fairness and justice and opportunity for all, but in a different world. That's why I say, for example,
but hold on a second.
That is why, when I became leader of the Labour Party, we rewrote the Labour Party's constitution to put a commitment to private enterprise alongside that of social justice. We've changed our relations with the trade unions. We've changed the way that we make policy. We've now reformed the way that... What I said to you a moment or two ago was that the Labour Party believed, as a whole, that it was best to get the law out of industrial relations, but times have moved on. I mean, David, we can sit here arguing about what happened in the 1970s and early 1980s.
Well, it's quite important because you were there.
And I was the person, probably above anybody else, who argued the case for modernising the Labour Party. And as I say to you, this notion that somehow, you know, Tony Blair was a sort of extreme left-winger, and now he's suddenly popped up...
I never said you were declined as extreme left-wing at that period.
And central to changing it so that our values lived again for the modern world.
All right.
Look, New Labour... The whole concept of New Labour is about recognising change. And I think the people... No, but hang on a minute.
But I'll come to New Labour in a moment.
You put this question to me, and it's a question of integrity, and it's a question of trust, and I want to answer it. We created New Labour. We call it New Labour precisely in order to be honest with people about the changes that have been made. We recognise, I've recognised throughout this election, there are certain things the Conservatives got right in the 1980s, and we should have been quicker to face up to that. But there are certain things that they got wrong. And what New Labour has been about providing is an alternative the people of this country have been crying out for. So, not winding the clock back to the past and not staying with a tired and discredited Conservative party.
So was your opinion?
No, of course not. I supported the Labour Party. I
Britain
stood as the Labour candidate.
Should have elected a Labour government under Michael Foot in '83?
Of course I wanted them to.
Unilateral disarmament?
David, please. Of course I wanted the Labour Party to be elected. I stood as a Labour Party candidate. But if you're trying to suggest to me that somehow the changes that we have made are superficial or not something we believe in, that is absurd. We have produced probably the greatest transformation in any political party that has been done in recent decades. And let me just tell you this, the Conservatives have changed too, you know. The Conservatives changed their position throughout the 1970s. They got away from what they saw was the muddle-headedness of Ted Heath and all the rest of it, and the new Thatcherites came in and took over. The idea that the Labour Party is the only party that has ever undergone a process of change, but the principles remain the same. That's why if you look at our programme today, you will see extending educational opportunity, tackling youth unemployment.
Yes,
No, but hang on
a shopping list. I'll come to that.
Never mind about a shopping list, David. The fact of the matter is we have made these changes in a way that is entirely consistent with principle.
We'll explore them. Just your new ally, Rupert Murdoch, was he right to take on at Wapping the print unions, and was Labour wrong to support the unions against him?
Look, these days are past.
I know they are past.
They are past and gone, and there's no point in going back.
Were you right in doing so?
We believe that these changes could have been done in a different way, but there is no point in going back over the past. There is a different world today. Let us address this world today, and let us see how we can make improvements to it. Let us see how we can make Britain a better place. And I repeat to you, I think it is very important that people understand we are not going to roll the clock, turn the clock back, roll back the tide. We're not going back to the past, but we are offering a better Britain for the future.
All right, let's look at...
We're going to do it in precisely the way that Gordon Brown has suggested, which is that we will undertake a review of the national assets, we'll compile a proper national register of the assets that are there, something indeed the Conservatives should have done before, and we'll see if there are ways in which we can meet that shortfall. But let me just put 2 points to you.
Wait a minute.
First of all, well, you can come back to it in a moment. Let me just put 2 points to you. First of all, this is the Conservatives that have left us in a situation where privatisation proceeds have to pay for current expenditure. It's the Conservatives who have got this problem. Now, we will have to face this problem and inherit it if we are elected, but it is a problem that has come about as a result of the Conservatives' mismanagement of the economy and the doubling of the asset stripping. We're compiling a register. No, we're compiling a register of those assets that are in the public sector in order to see if there are those that can be better off in the private sector and raise finance. And, for example, we said when the government sold the Ministry of Defence homes last year, we didn't say in principle it's wrong. We had very strong objections to the way that it was being done and the deal that was being secured for the public sector. We didn't object in principle on the railways. Indeed, it's been John Prescott who said, let's get private finance into the railway system. And the reason that we have had to say, in relation to rail, as with water, we oppose the privatisations for perfectly good reasons, but we can't renationalise them, is because the Conservatives have privatised these industries and squandered the money. The money's gone.
You've never talked...
Certainly look at that as indeed...
You're not ruling it out,
we don't rule it out, and we can't rule it out, because the Conservatives, as you rightly say, can blame them for the way they've mismanaged the public finance. Yes, but you've got other measures. Not measures that we would want to take.
Many people think you should put up taxation.
Yes, but I don't happen to think that.
All right.
Now, if I may, you've asked me the question, so I think I should complete the answer. The plain fact is, if you don't look at that, then because of the way that they have mismanaged the finances, because they have doubled the national debt, because we've got such huge problems on borrowing, then we will have to look at those things that can fill that hole left by the privatisation proceeds. But you said it wasn't in the manifesto. You will actually find in the manifesto, under the section dealing with public finance, that we will conduct a review of all public spending and make sure that all departments conduct their spending in a way that roots out waste and inefficiency.
Yeah, but it doesn't say anything about selling off assets.
No, that is absolutely
well, I've just read it out. It's not
that. But what we say there very clearly is that there should be a review of the way that government manages its spending.
Yeah.
And if I may just point out to you, local government has been selling assets over a considerable period of time. So the idea that there's anything odd about this doesn't follow from that we agree with every privatisation of the Conservatives. I mean, if you look at what's happened, for example, with many of their privatisations, they've been selling off monopoly public services, often at a knockdown price, and then as we see with the appalling situation in our railways, it can often lead to poorer services for the customer and very large windfall profits that are not justified. But, you know, you asked me earlier about the changes in the Labour Party. The basic change was surely this, that we were rewriting Clause 4 of the party constitution to make it clear, as we say in the new Clause 4, that those essential goods and services that are essential for the public should either be owned by the public or accountable to them. We dropped the commitment that nationalisation as a matter of doctrine had to go forward. So these changes that we're making, I mean, again, I come back to the point that I'm saying to you. I am pleased that the Labour Party is a modern, forward-looking party today. And I think people, again, in this country would welcome a government that's not going to take a dogmatic, doctrinal view, say everything in the public sector is good or everything in the public sector is bad. Make up our minds on what actually works. What counts is what works.
Of course, there are lots